Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Financial Freedom Show with Chase Lawson. We've got another great episode on tap for you today. I am thrilled for today's episode and hope you are as well. For those just tuning in and just meeting me, my name is Chase Lawson. I am a personal finance enthusiast and the author of the best-selling book, Financial Freedom, Breaking the Chains to Independence and Creating Massive Wealth, available on Amazon. My goal with each of these episodes is to make personal finance simple. So if you're lost or confused when it comes to this subject, do not worry. We tackle all things personal finance on this show, so please make sure you subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. I'm delighted to be joined today by a colleague in the personal finance arena. Today, Zach Roberts, owner of Application-Based Learning, is gracing us with his presence. Zach is a great guy with an even greater goal and mission, and today we're going to discuss a very important topic around debt payoff strategies. But before we begin, Zach, do you mind introducing yourself and giving a bit of your background and what brought you into this field?
Of course. So my name is Zach Roberts. Thank you very much for the opportunity to hop on. I own Application-Based Learning, LLC. I earned my master's in business administration in finance and have been obsessed with personal finance for many years. One of the services our business provides is a 7-unit personal finance course, and our goal is to help 1 million people be better with their money. Because for one reason or another in the traditional education system, it completely skips out on teaching people financial literacy for the most part. I experienced this firsthand as a student and now as a middle school teacher myself. I don't see anything changing anytime soon. Let's dive in.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that introduction. I just got to say, I love that goal. I have a similar goal in my platform. I think you can agree with me in that personal finance doesn't have to be complicated. A lot of people just like to make it seem like it is. But as long as you have the tools and resources at your disposal and a willingness to learn, it really can be quite simple. And it is a shame that it isn't taught widely in the American education system. So Zach, let's just talk about debt high level. There's obviously different types of debt, and sometimes it's unavoidable. Would you mind giving an overview of debt, the dangers it can pose, and if there's ever a such thing as good debt?
For sure. So arguably, debt can be both good and bad. We've always taught that if your debt is making you money or is directly assisting you in making money, that debt can actually be good. The other type of debt that is good is debt that you got at maybe really good terms, such as maybe you needed a new car and you got one at 0% interest during a really good time, such as recently, or you refinance a home to under 3% interest, so you have really low interest on that larger mortgage. Another thing to keep in mind is that this is all subjective and based on the lifestyle of the person involved. So one example we always give, let's say Chase may have the discretionary income and lifestyle that demands a newer car. Maybe he has less debt or a job that demands reliable transportation and a lot of it. So getting a car at a good rate may be the move for him and may be considered good debt. But let's say for me, I work from home and just purchased a new house. So further depleting my discretionary income by buying a car I will rarely drive would be considered bad debt for me. Bad debt is any debt that isn't making you money. It could be depreciating in value and it isn't directly helping you to increase your cash flow. It can also be debt that you have accumulated with terrible terms like high interest rates, early payoff fees, and debts that are over really long term. There's a ton of dangers involved with debt, including depleting your savings, holding you back from purchasing things that can increase your cash flow, and lowering your discretionary income and becoming financially free. One statistic that has always stuck out to me is the debt payment versus compound interest example. So if I pay $200 a month for 10 years, which is lower than the average length it takes to pay off credit card debt, I will have paid $24,000 over the life of that debt. If instead I invested that $200 a month into the S&P 500, for example, and that earned a 9.8% interest, which is the average for the past 90 years, I would have $41,597.64 after the 10 years, which would create a swing of over $65,000, which for most people is a life-changing amount of money.
Wow, Zach, I completely agree. That truly is quite powerful. And I think a lot of people don't realize the magnitude that debt can have on a person. But, when you actually put numbers to it, it's just crazy how big of an impact debt can have. And I would even argue that the difference is probably even larger than $65,000 because a lot of that $24,000 was likely in interest payments. So had you never incurred that debt, chances are you would have been able to invest more sooner. But even $65,000 is more than a lot of people bring home in a year. So that could be the difference in retiring a year or two sooner.
For sure. So some common type of debts include, but are not limited to, student loan, credit card, and mortgage debts. So student loans to me is the absolute craziest, and I'll tell you why. Our society has, at least for a generation or two, convinced a ton of people to go to college because a lot of people think that was the only way to get a good paying job. Only 6 states require kids to take personal finance before they graduate high school. Yet USA students owe $1.6 trillion in student loans that won't go away even if you file for bankruptcy. To me, if education was taught as an investment, people or parents may be more likely to figure out a return on investment before packing up the bags and sending their kids off.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. The cost of college education has truly gotten out of hand today, so hopefully something can be done about that. But
it's definitely wild, and it always throws a little wrench in when it's dealing with minors too. That's always a big difference. But next up is credit card debt. Credit cards can change your financial life forever, and many argue that for true financial freedom, you need to have some level of expertise with them. Some interesting facts from debt.org show that over half our nation's population has credit card debt. The average credit card holder has at least 4 cards. Each household with a credit card has over $8,000 in debt, costing over $1,000 a year in interest alone. And nearly 80% of customers have at least one credit card. This debt racks up fast, and for many people, it almost seems like they're spending fake money. But if you don't have discipline and good habits, credit card debt can cripple your credit score, preventing you from obtaining financial freedom in the short term and forcing you and your family to pay the financial price in the long term through not as good loans, terms, etc. And then the last common type of debt that we're going to talk about today is mortgage debt. So mortgages are loans, most often needed to purchase real estate, homes, rentals, etc. Whether or not good debt exists is highly debated, but assuming it does, mortgages usually fall into this category. This seems to be true because in general, the interest rates are low because of the term of the loan is between 15 and 30 years in most cases. Mortgage debt also has a large variance. This means that depending on the person getting the mortgage, their loan can look very different. For example, down payment sizes are dependent on whether or not the home is a primary residence or a rental. It could depend on an individual's income, their credit score, and many more factors. Throughout the 20th and 21st centuries, homes generally tend to gain value over time. Obviously, pandemics, depressions, recessions, and the such can prevent that generally, but real estate usually does well, especially in the long term.
Yeah, and I would agree with you on that as well, Zach. I think a mortgage is the best kind of debt you can have, as everybody does have to live somewhere, and in most states it is cheaper to own than it is to rent. And as you defined it earlier, good debt is debt that makes you money. And historically, houses in America have increased by 3.63% per year since 1991 and 5.89% per year since 2012, according to the S&P Case-Shiller Home Price Index. And with mortgages at historically low rates, many are able to secure a mortgage at 3 to 4% interest, if not less, which is less than the amount of homes that have been increasing per year. So you're coming out even farther ahead.
Yeah, that is really, really awesome and really good financial habits to build. These are just some of the common debts. Tons of others exist, and in general, the faster you can get out of debt, the faster your journey to financial freedom will be.
Yeah, and obviously debt can really eat at somebody, especially when you look at the interest that just continues to build and build upon itself. And like we already said, sometimes it can be good and sometimes it is unavoidable. Nobody's perfect, no matter how hard we try. But when you do acquire debt, it's important to understand how exactly to pay it off. So when it comes to paying off debt, there's really 2 primary ways to go about doing so. There's the Debt Snowball method, and then there's the Debt Avalanche method. Each method is slightly different and ideal for different people, but both serve the same purpose of trying to quickly pay off debt. Either strategy can work for you. What's most important is having a plan, staying disciplined to that plan, and just putting it in action. So Zach, mind walking through what the Debt Snowball method is for everyone who maybe isn't familiar?
For sure. So Debt Snowball is a debt repayment strategy that involves paying off the smallest balances first. When you are setting this up, you should list out your debt in order with the smallest balance first and the largest balance last. This strategy is really cool because it motivates you to keep going and shows you how discipline can change your outlook. In addition, it helps to free up your discretionary income or income after all expenses are paid off. Because you are paying down the smallest balances, you are reducing the monthly amount you owe to bills, which allows you to free up money to spend on other things or other debt.
Great. Thanks for that overview of the Debt Snowball. One thing I'll add to that is that with any debt payoff methodology that you choose, Always first make sure that you pay the minimum payment on all of your debts. This way you avoid a negative hit on your credit due to missed payment. Only after you have paid those minimum payments due on each debt do you then pay extra on specific debts based on the debt payoff strategy you choose. So Zach just discussed the debt snowball method, which is a great method to follow. But on the other hand, there's the debt avalanche strategy. The debt avalanche strategy is intended to pay the least amount of interest possible. So to achieve this, you pay down the debt with the highest interest rate first, regardless of balance. This way, you focus your efforts on getting out of a debt that's accruing interest the fastest. And from a pure dollars and cents standpoint, this strategy makes the most financial sense, and you'll get out of debt quicker mathematically. However, this strategy may not be for everyone, and we'll discuss why that is so in just a bit. So to help break this down further, let's give a quick example of each strategy in action. So let's say you currently have 3 debt balances. You have a personal loan of $10,000 at 8% interest, student loans of $20,000 at 5% interest, and credit card debt of $30,000 at 18% interest. Zach, do you want to walk through what the debt snowball method would have you do here?
For sure. So just as a quick reminder, the debt snowball method, you're going to pay the lowest dollar amount balance off first, wipe it out, and then move on. So for this example, someone using the snowball method would prioritize paying these debts off in this order. First, because it's the smallest balance, they would pay off their personal loan of $10,000 at 8% interest. Then they would go down to their student loans of $20,000 at 5% interest. And then third, they would pay off their credit card debt of $30,000 at 18% interest. And remember, you got to cover your minimum payments for all of them, and then take any extra money you have and put that on your top priority debt for the snowball. That is the personal loan of $10,000. So priority 1 is making sure, again, you pay all of your minimum payments every single time. We can't reiterate that enough because you can't skip out on that. Otherwise, bad financial things will happen. So once you budget and understand how much money you have left over after all your expenses are paid in a given month, you apply all of that towards the smallest balance. Again, in this case, that's the personal loan of $10,000. Once you have that loan paid off, you would take all your discretionary income and apply it to the student loan of $20,000 because that's the next priority until that is paid off, so on and so forth.
Simple enough. And thanks for that explanation, Zach. So as Zach mentioned, Debt Snowball focuses on paying off the lowest balance debts first. Conversely, Debt Avalanche, once again, is where you start with the highest interest rate debt. So in the same scenario, rather than starting with a personal loan, you would start with a credit card debt since it is the highest interest rate at 18%. Since you owe $30,000 in credit card debt, you're accruing $5,400 in interest per year on that debt. So with Debt Avalanche, the goal is to reduce that high interest as quickly as possible. So once again, you still will pay the minimum payment due on each of your debts first before shifting any remaining discretionary income towards that high interest debt. Once you do pay off that credit card debt, then you'll tackle the $10,000 personal loan since it has the second highest interest rate at 8%. And then finally, you'll pay off the student loan debt since it carries the lowest interest rate at only 5%. Now, as we touched on before, either strategy can work if applied correctly, but each strategy may be better for a particular type of person. So Zach, who might benefit from the debt snowball?
Yeah, so there's definitely a few subsets of people that would really benefit. I know if you're anything like me, motivation really helps me to stay disciplined. And Debt Snowball is really for people who need to see progress, like actually see it, sometimes even on a day-to-day basis. They're going to need the motivation to keep going, and for people who need to be more cash flexible by paying off small balances in full, which would get rid of that monthly payment. And then also people who are more worried about cash flexibility in the short term compared to their outlook in the long term. So the longer the terms of each debt or loan, the more Debt Avalanche makes sense. But Debt Snowball is great for those who like to see a difference and for those trying to free up more money in the short term. This works well, keeps people motivated to pay them off and not give up, and can be changed at any time. Some people even start with the Debt Snowball to pay off a few small debts at first and then change to the Debt Avalanche when all their large debts are left.
Yeah, that's the great thing about the Debt Snowball. It can be really encouraging and help keep that discipline if you see those smaller balances fall off more quickly. And I know in our prior scenario, it may be frustrating to go several months and still have all 3 of those debts with balances. However, Debt Avalanche, once again, is the smarter play from a pure financial dollars and cents mathematical standpoint, all else being equal and assuming a person can stay disciplined to the plan and pay off the same amount each month for either strategy without giving up, they will get out of debt sooner with the debt avalanche methodology. In a prior episode, I did discuss compound interest, which is where your interest accrues more interest. So that's why on credit card statements, you may see it list how long it will take to pay off the balance and how much extra you will pay if you make only the minimum payment each month, compared to how long it would take and how much money you will save if you paid a little bit extra each month. That is compound interest at work. So by focusing on those higher interest balances first, you'll get out of those debts sooner, since less interest will have accrued and they can slowly work your way down. As such, this method is best for people who can be self-motivated and disciplined to put a plan in place and stay on track to that plan. It's for people who are number-oriented and can understand the impact that interest has on their debts. And it's for people who won't get discouraged if they don't see those smaller, lower interest debts go away quickly. So Zach, what in your opinion makes either of these strategies work?
To me, it first takes active financial thinking. In this crazy world of work, family, friends, leisure, abundance, consumption, and so much more, it can be easy to put your debt at the back of your mind. Once you are actively thinking about your financial situation, even for just 10 to 20 minutes per day, you can build a strategy and habits that will allow for you to drastically reshape your finances. For Debt Snowball, it takes organization and a detailed budget to maximize your discretionary income and delegate it accordingly. Because you are paying the small balances first in full, you will open up more discretionary income, building motivation and flexibility. The Debt Avalanche method takes a ton of discipline because you're not going to notice the difference until later on in the term of the loan. Because you are paying the loan with the highest interest, not the smallest balance, you may not see the motivation of having more cash available after you knock out one of the loans. Discipline and the ability to see the bigger picture is vital with this method.
Great. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. You obviously need to stay disciplined no matter what method you choose. And obviously, as you mentioned before, Zach, there are psychological benefits to the Debt Snowball method. It's why some financial experts like Dave Ramsey so strongly advocate for this approach. After all, it can be very motivating and encouraging as you go from 5 debt balances to 4 to 3 and so on. But what if you could get those same psychological benefits with Debt Avalanche? After all, as we mentioned before, Debt Avalanche does have the greater financial impact. In my opinion, it's all a matter of how you frame your thoughts and mindset on the matter. Sure, it can be frustrating to go month after month and continue to have those same 5 debts. But what if instead of viewing it as the same number of debts, you looked at the total remaining balance to be paid and track that monthly instead? That way, if you make a list of all your debts and update it each month as you continue to pay them down, you can actually visibly see the total balances quickly decreasing, and that will give you the same psychological benefits that the Debt Snowball method can provide. Zach, do you have any other tips or anything else to add on to that?
Yeah, for sure. So one important thing to understand is that your debt payoff strategy should be individualized, meaning don't compare your debt, income, and life situation to others because every single situation is different. Some people have an important cost coming up that they need to free up discretionary income by paying off a small balance loan first and eliminating that monthly payment. Others may have a more stable situation and can afford to pay off the highest interest rates first and save on interest over time. Another tip is that no one is perfect. It's okay to splurge every once in a while as long as it's not a habit. And lastly, stay disciplined and build good habits so that when you are even thinking about purchasing something outrageous, the financial bird on your shoulder will chirp in your ear and convince you that you don't need it. Building these good habits over time can and will change your life forever.
Definitely. Some other ideas that I would add to that include perhaps you can create some milestones that are important to you, such as paying off your first credit card or paying down $1,000. Or, you could just feel good knowing that you're taking steps that others may not be taking to put yourself in a good financial position. And while Debt Snowball and Debt Avalanche are the primary methods of debt reduction and elimination, there are other approaches you can take as well. For example, you may decide to take on a hybrid method. For this, list out all of your debts, their balances, and their interest rates. And perhaps you start with the small balances that you can fully pay off in 1 to 3 months, give or take, to build that momentum and get those early wins, and then shift towards the higher interest rate balances to try to decrease the interest that does accrue. Or if you have multiple credit cards, since credit cards are typically among the higher interest rates one can have, perhaps you start with the lowest balance credit card so that you can pay that off quickly, but are still focusing on a higher interest debt first. Another debt reduction strategy is to focus first on those that are most annoying or have the highest emotional impact. For example, you may have a friend or family member that has lent you money, and in order to prevent jeopardizing that relationship, you could start by paying that loan off first. Or you might have carried a specific debt much longer than any others, so it could be nice to just kind of get that over with finally. But Zach, I know everybody's different and is wired different psychologically, and has their own preferences. But what would you say is your personal preference on these debt strategies if you were to get in a situation where you had debt that for some reason you couldn't pay off in full?
For sure. And I'm so happy you brought up the hybrid method. And I know I've mentioned it a couple times on here, but it's just so important to understand that just because you pick one doesn't mean that that can't be changed or altered, even on a day-to-day basis. I know all of us, our lives tend to be so complicated that things can change just with the snap of a finger, which a lot of us have noticed recently. Back to your question, for me, it depends on my individual debt balances. So if I were to have a couple balances that are less than, say, like $5,000 for my situation, I would start with Debt Snowball, build motivation by seeing these balances disappear, while at the same time freeing up that discretionary income, because those minimum required payments would disappear. So in the short term, that would allow me some more cash flexibility. I could put that on other debt, but it really frees up some cash for me, which for me is always really something that I prioritize. So once my small balances are paid off, I always switch to Debt Avalanche and save myself the most money possible over the longer terms of those large balances.
Awesome. Yeah, and like you mentioned before, everybody is different. So it sounds like you employ more of a hybrid method there based on that. For me, I'm a big numbers guy. I see the long-term picture. I see that interest building up. So for me, I'm definitely all about the Debt Avalanche method. But like we've said time and time again, this is individualized. So do the method that makes the most sense for you, and maybe try one method, see how it works. And then if you maybe try a different method the next month and see which one makes a bigger impact on you, and play around with it. Only you're going to know what's going to work best for you. Well, great. So Zach, where can they find you if they want to learn more about your company or yourself or ask you questions or anything like that?
For sure. So they can find me on both Instagram and Facebook at Application-Based Learning. We have a new YouTube channel as well, in addition to our presence on Udemy with our Financial Flexibility Basic Personal Finance 7-unit course for those that are very new to personal finance. Thanks again so much for this opportunity to hop on here and discuss my passion. It's been an absolute blast.
Of course, and thanks again for joining this episode, Zach. Everybody listening, be sure to check out Zach and Application-Based Learning. As always, I hope you got some value out of this episode. If you are struggling with debt, hopefully you were able to learn something today and are motivated to apply one or more of these strategies to your own debt situation to get out of debt quickly. Thanks again for tuning in. As always, please be sure to like this episode or leave a review if you got value out of it. Further, if you haven't yet subscribed, be sure to do so you can stay up to date every time a new episode comes out. Share this with someone who needs to hear this, and let me know your thoughts or what else you would like to learn about in a future episode. Thanks so much, stay safe, and go get them.